Unit 1, Political Systems, Regimes, and Governments, Topic 1.9, Sustaining Legitimacy. So remember, legitimacy is the belief of the citizens that the government has the right to rule over a particular territory. And it's basically the whole idea of consent of governed. Okay, so after this, you will be able to identify actions that reinforce legitimacy, and please provide an example from 3 of the AP6 states. Identify actions that undermine legitimacy, again, providing examples. Describe how economic policy can help or hurt a state's legitimacy, and provide an example from one of the states that I cover. Okay, so actions that reinforce legitimacy or enhance this idea that the people consent to being governed by the particular government. When there is a peaceful resolution of conflict, whether it is internal conflict or it's a conflict or a war with another country, if you can have a peaceful resolution of conflict, then you're going to be in good shape. If there's peaceful transfer of power after a free and fair election, if there is a reduction in government corruption, and of course, economic development. So when people are fat and happy and have money, they're going to be pleased with the government. Remember, pocketbook voters from U.S. government, that idea that, people will vote based on their economic situation. And like with the UK, if you have devolved power to regional government, which results in peaceful resolution of conflict. Sorry about that. All right, so let's go through examples of each of the AP6 of how they have reinforced legitimacy. China has a growing GDP, rapidly growing GDP. Another thing that they have done to try to increase their level of legitimacy with ethnic minority groups is that they have reserved some seats in the National People's Congress for ethnic minorities. It's not a ton. We're talking about 55, 57 out of over 2,000 seats, but at least they can say, hey, we are considering the needs and the wants of these different ethnicities. Iran, their enhanced legitimacy comes from their religious authority, theocratic rule, juris guardianship, where the people in charge are responsible for guarding the tenets of Islam. Mexico, states have power through a system of federalism. So again, regional governments do have the ability to do what they think is necessary to provide for the people at the state level. And again, the PRI is no longer the dominant party because of electoral reforms. That's always a good example for Mexico. Legitimacy, democratic consolidation. Just always remember that as an example, especially if you're going into writing your FRQs. Nigeria. Increased representation of ethnic groups through that concept of federal character. Remember, they have to have a cabinet member from each of the states. And the idea that 25 of most states' votes have to win, or in order to win the presidency, you must secure 25 of most of the states' votes, which is going to show that you are supported by at least some of the other ethnicities, as opposed to just being supported by your own ethnicity. And again, another good example is the peaceful handover of power in 2015 from Goodluck Jonathan to Buhari. Oops, wrong way. Russia, they have a dominant party that's led by a charismatic authority, and that works for them. And this idea of statism, where the government takes care of the people, as long as the people are taken care of, the whole idea of economic development, they'll be happy with Putin for the most part. Of course, we'll get into that. All right, so the UK, we're dealing with conflict resolution with the devolution of power to the regional bodies of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, and tradition with the monarchy. Legitimacy is going to be undermined when you have increased corruption, reduced electoral competition, and when there's economic downturn or social conflict and it's not handled well. Here's the corruption perception index. The darker your country is, the more corrupt it is perceived to be. So there's U.S., Mexico. We're going to have corruption because of drug cartels. I'll get into that. Here's Nigeria. All right, Iran, China, Russia, the UK. All right, so let's go. China. Part of their legitimacy is being undermined by what is happening with the Uyghur, the Muslim minority population in the western part of China. Also, China, of course, undermining free press. And more recently, this kind of has gone on since 2018, 2019, really. And then 2020, it came to a head, backing out on the agreement to allow Hong Kong to be a sovereign city. Hong Kong was once owned and controlled by the UK. It was handed back over to China in 1997, but China had agreed that since the city of Hong Kong had been democratic, that Hong Kong would be able to maintain their democratic ways, and they have backed out of that, and they have tightened up, and kind of the same policies that have undermined democracy in China have bled into the UK. I mean, Hong Kong, not UK. All right, Iran, the Green Movement in 2009, which was a protest against the election of President Ahmadinejad, who, quote unquote, won against the competition Mousavi. It was perceived as a rigged election. And the Green Movement, green was the campaign colors of Mousavi, and people, went out and protested this rigged election, and they were countered by police who violently suppressed the protest. Shutting down of the internet to stop communications about protest. So it's nothing for the Ayatollah to say, we're going in an internet lockdown or a blackout, and you can't communicate with each other, because people communicate with each other about upcoming protests through the internet, of course, social media. So they do that. That's not great. The people don't like that. Mexico's example of undermined legitimacy, if you look at what happened in 1985, there was a massive earthquake in Mexico City, and 5,000 people died. The party in control was perceived as corrupt and not able to respond to this natural disaster. And then in the next upcoming election, the pre-candidate lost, but didn't lose because there was a power outage on election night. And when people woke up the next morning, the pre-candidate had won. So that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back for Mexico, realizing that they needed to do something to reform the system. It took them a while, though. All right, Nigeria. 2019, Nigeria delayed their presidential election because of attacks on polling locations, and there was destroyed ballots, and the local polling locations needed more time to get the ballots redone and more ballots printed and stuff like that. It was only delayed by a week, but that's still, people were like, eek, that's not good, not a good look. All right, Russia. Most recently, Alexei Navalny. So Putin has this way of using force to take out opponents. And I put poisoning in quotes, but Alexei Navalny was poisoned by a chemical agent that is readily used by the Russian government security forces, one of the chemical components that was used often by the KGB. And Alexei Navalny was getting better in Germany, and then just said, I'm going to come back home to Russia. And so this is January 29th, 2020, last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, Alexei Navalny touched down in an airport in Russia and was immediately jailed, and then was encouraging and has encouraged his followers to do countrywide protest in Russia. So, and we'll get more into that saga between Navalny and Putin. Okay. The UK, there's regional dispute over the Brexit vote. Okay. Don't know what that random T is doing. The government led the government led by the Conservative Party struggled to figure out how to accomplish the actual clean exit from the European Union, and that caused some turmoil and consternation in the UK. Oh, and I realized that Grammarly doesn't work on slides. That's why there's so many mistakes. So I'll have to work on it. Sorry, guys. Okay, economic policies effect on legitimacy. So let's go back to the idea of pocketbook voters, where people, make decisions based on economics. So we can kind of connect that concept to this idea of a state having legitimacy because the economy is doing well. The problem with economic policy is that sometimes there's inequality between the regions. So some parts of the country are going to benefit from economic development, and some of the parts of the country aren't. And that's going to cause conflicts, which can undermine legitimacy, right? So Mexico, there's a north-south divide. You have factories in the northern cities because the north is close to the United States border, right? And because of NAFTA and even NAFTA 2.0, the free trade agreement between the North American countries, the factories were built in the northern states, maquiladoras, and those states have more job opportunities and more economic development versus the agriculture in the southern and central states. All right. Nigeria, you're going to see a north-south divide as well, where the north is going to be more underdeveloped and the south is going to have the oil reserves around the Niger Delta, and that's going to cause more economic development and economic opportunity in the southern states. China, you have the urban-rural divide. The urban areas are where you find the special economic zones, the SEZs. Special economic zones are where factories and foreign investment are actually allowed, because you remember China's government is going to control where outside influences are allowed to be because it is a communist regime, right? It has a communist system and the government is going to control that. So in those SEZs, you are going to see more development. So how does it exacerbate the conflict? Okay, so because of the north-south divide, in the south, you see the Zapatistas movement. It's named after Ernesto Zapata. Gosh, I'm sorry. Ernesto, the farmer. I apologize. I'll make sure I clear that up in class. But Ernesto was a farmer from the southern states of Chiapas, and the Zapatistas movement is going to fight for indigenous rights and protest the socioeconomic inequalities that was increased after NAFTA. Nigeria. Sorry, I'm getting excited for the Delta Avengers. Okay, so you see environmental protests in the southern states, like the Delta Avengers are going to do things, and we are going to talk more about them. They do things to disrupt the production of oil because of the environmental impact that it has in the southern states. You see Boko Haram, which formed in the north. Boko Haram, is a terrorist organization that really played upon people's economic inequalities in the northern states. Plus, it's a Muslim extremist organization. All right, China, you see illegal migration from rural to urban areas. In China, they have something, it's household registration. And when you are born, you are registered as a resident of the village or the town or the city that you were born. And you have to stay in that town of birth if you want government services. So that would be like you were born in Smithfield, you have to stay in Smithfield if you want, to be able to take advantage of some of the services that the government is offering you, like education or healthcare. All right. So what happens is that people will move to the urban areas to get a job, but they live there illegally and they cannot get government services. So we talk a lot about it in the US about immigrants from other countries, but China has this issue where you have migration within the country and they're battling some of the same things. Okay, that is it.